That's your crossroad location.
Oh, down by Max. Right? Yeah.
Hillside Mall or anything.
No.
Has to be that location. Has to be that location. And then it's got to be. Halloween.
Yeah, I gave my grandchildren a bunch of stuff for Halloween. Whatever they wanted, I would offer them on the table. The little bags of chips that have, the little bags.
The little bags.
They've got about 10 chips in them. They don't have many. Mars bars, I just take what they wanted.
I got the same one. I got the same one in cheese at Costco.
Yeah. How many in it? Not many.
6 or 7. And I looked at it. And the bag was this big. There's $200.
Yeah. Oh, that's fast.
Yeah.
But it was delicious. Yeah.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome here tonight. If you're still kind of finding your way in, I invite you to grab a seat. And if you're able to, please feel free to stand with us as we begin to worship here tonight. Just open with a word of prayer. Father God, we thank you for today. Thank you again just for another chance to be together, Lord, to be in your presence. Father, I pray that you would help us to grow in wisdom, Lord, in our knowledge of you and of your ways, Lord. Teach us the path that you would have us to walk. And Father God, would you open up the heavens and show us your glory here tonight, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. Again, if you're able, I invite you to stand, and we'll begin to worship you. Show us your glory, Lord. Sing it again. Show us
us your glory. Show us your power. Show us your glory, Lord. Open up the heavens, we want to see you. Open up the floodgates, a mighty river flowing from your heart, filling every part of our way. Open up the Open up the heavens, we want to see you. Open up the floodgates, a mighty river flowing from your heart, filling every part of our way. God never fails, will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God is never late, He's working all things out. You're working all things out. And yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. And yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will for all my days. Yes, I will.
we will lift you high. Father, and your worthiness, I've said this before, that your worthiness isn't dependent on how we're feeling or whatever our situation might be. No matter where we are in life, in our walk, in our faith, however we're feeling, you're worthy of all that we have. So, Father, help us to give that to you, Lord. Father God, help us to walk in that truth, Lord, to walk in your presence. Help us to know that you are there. It says that, Jesus, you are there interceding for us on our behalf. So even when we feel like we have no words to say, if we're in those hard moments, you're there advocating for us, Lord. Thank you for that. In Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. You can take a seat.
Well, hello and welcome. Welcome to Canvas Church. If this is your first time, we're so excited that you're here, and I hope that you have felt welcomed. And let me just say this: you're not just welcomed, you're wanted. That's why we're here. We're here for you. We are here to proclaim the truth of the songs that we just sang, and we want everybody to know that truth. And so excited that you're here tonight. We believe that when God draws people to himself, when God draws people to a time of worship like this, it's not accidental. And so whatever it is that brought you here tonight, that you're thinking, well, I heard it from somebody, or I was passing through, or whatever it is that you think has brought you here, I believe that there's more to it than that. That God is at work in your life. And so tonight I hope that you're encouraged, if by nothing else, that you walk away from here realizing, God's at work in my life. Because people don't just go to church services, right? That's not people just go to the grocery store because brothers got to eat, right? But you don't just go to church. Scripture actually teaches us, Jesus taught us that God draws people to himself. And so when you come to things like this, it's actually evidence that God is at work in your life. And so that to me is something to celebrate. Let me make a confession. I'm a millennial, so I should understand technology apparently better than I do. But my iPad was doing weird things, and I thought I had it fixed, and then I pushed a button. And now let me show this to you. Now everything went to Halloween mode. And so forgive me tonight if I'm staring at this trying to figure out what I need to say, because all of my notes turned into neon color mode, and all of my slides turned into X-ray negative, photographic negative type thing. So I don't know what I'm saying tonight. So we'll see what happens. But so grateful that you're here. Canvas Church, if you don't already know, Canvas Church started over on the West Shore about 5 years ago now, and a few years into that, they were praying, and we need to start a campus over in Oak Bay on the other side of the city. And Sarah and I got a call. We were in Atlanta, Georgia. I grew up outside of Calgary, but had never been to Vancouver Island before. Been to Vancouver a lot of times, never been to Vancouver Island. And got a call and said, hey, through all these different connections, you feel like God has brought you to our minds, and want to ask if you would consider moving your family from Atlanta, Georgia, to Vancouver Island, and to take leadership over starting a new church in Oak Bay. It's well, that's 2,800 miles. All of our families here in Georgia, and let us pray about that. And if God's calling us to do that, then we're in. But we want to make sure God's calling us to do that, because that's a lot of miles and a lot of other things to do. And so the short story is we do feel God's called us here, not because we're in any way special, but we believe God is at work in Oak Bay, and he's at work in Victoria. And we believe that in this aspect, God was saying, would you come and join me in what I'm doing in Victoria? And guess what, guys? You guys are part of that story too. And so don't ever think that this is all about me or Sarah or Jake, or this is about us joining God in what he is doing. God's the one who has the power. He's the one who's at work. He's the one doing things that we could never hope to do on our own. and we're along for the ride, right? We say, God, just show me what part I play in this bigger story, and I'm in. And so that's a little bit of who we are as a church. The sailboat, if you want to look at that as lifting up a canvas sail and saying, God, if your spirit doesn't come as a wind and fill our sail, then we're just floating here, really doing nothing. You set the direction for this church, and you give us the power to go to whatever it is that you've called us to do. And we'll be faithful to raise the sail, but God, you fill that sail, and you send us where you've called us. Not many years ago, I was at seminary. I was going to school. I was living in the seminary apartments. I had this roommate, and we never really saw each other. Like he did school in the evening and worked during the day, and I did school during the day. And we just hardly ever crossed paths. We're sort of ships passing in the night kind of deal. And I remember one time when we actually were together, and we crossed paths in the kitchen, and he saw me pouring grease down the kitchen sink, like draining something. And I know some of you are already thinking, like Mike, how many stories do you have of dumb things that you've done? Always one more, and there's new ones always happening. My dad used to say, for a preacher, there's never an embarrassing moment, just another sermon illustration. Write them down. And so I'm pouring grease down the sink, and he's like, don't do that. Why not? Well, because it's going to harden up in the sink, and eventually it's going to clog the pipes, and we're going to have a problem on our hands. And I'm just like, it's just a little bit of grease. Like, it's not like, you should see for the mustard. By the way, thank you to all the folks who went and served at the mustard seed on Friday night. Heard great things about it. You guys are awesome, and it's great to serve. It's great to serve people, and it's great to serve people with other people. Jesus himself said, I came to serve, not to be served. And so when we serve, I think we are representing Jesus well when we serve together. And so thank you guys. And Sarah and I did a lot of the prep for that meal at our house the night before, and we cooked a lot of meat and drained a lot of grease and filled a big thing. And I was sort of under the impression, if you do that and you pour that down the sink, that's a problem. But a little bit of grease here, a little bit of grease there. And so I was like, yeah, it's no big deal. And he's like, all right, man, but if something happens, you're the one calling the guy that's got to come and fix it. I'm like, yeah, but nothing's going to happen. And so I sort of keep doing that, and some weeks go by, and eventually I go to turn on the sink, and the water's not going down the drain. I'm just like, well, okay, sure, so something's wrong, but I don't know how to fix this problem. And so I go to the hardware store, and I get the biggest thing of Drano that I can find. I'm just going to dump this Drano down the sink, and that's going to do whatever it is Drano does, and it's going to fix the problem. Drano is just problem fixer in sink problem fixer in liquid form. So I'm just going to pour that down there, problem gone. So I start pouring all this Drano down there. Well, it's not doing anything. And so finally I'm thinking, oh no, my roommate's going to kill me because I'm clogging up the sink. I got to make that call. And so I call the campus maintenance guy. I'm just like, hey, you should have come and something's wrong with our sink. It's like when our sons, one hits the other or something. It's just like, Luca hurt himself. How did Luca hurt himself? It's like, here's the facts of what happened without me in the picture. It's like, yeah, something's going on with our sink. I need you to come and look at it. So he comes and he starts looking at it, and he's like, man, what is this mess? And I'm like, well, I don't know. He's like, did you pour grease down the sink? Well, maybe a little bit. I'm saying, well, let me just see. And so he gets down there and he starts messing with the tubes with the piping underneath. And then all of a sudden he takes it off and everything comes splashing out all over him. And it's like he just remembers, wait a second. Didn't you say that you poured a bunch of Drano down here too? And he's covered in it, and he just goes, ah! And he runs to the bathroom, he goes running through our house, and he's in the bathroom, and he's splashing water in his eyes and stuff, and then it's everywhere. And I look, and our sink, looks like somebody just shoved a bunch of like Crisco in there. I mean, it was fully blocked. We're just like, we need triple bypass on this thing. It is completely plugged, and so it's this huge mess. There's water, there's Drano everywhere, and kind of laugh about it. And my roommate comes home, and I'm just like, well, had a problem with this thing, but it's all fixed now. I just said, like, man, like I told you. Like I told you, if you keep doing that, you might not see the problem tomorrow, you might not see it right away, but eventually you keep doing that wrong thing and it's going to catch up to you. It's going to block everything. Because I knew in my head what I needed to do, but that knowledge didn't translate into action. And there's a big difference, isn't there? There's a difference between like knowing the right thing to do and actually doing the right thing. We live in an information age. They talk about this, the 21st century, is like we're in an information age. You can jump on Google, you can get on the internet, and you have more information at your fingertips than anyone else anytime in history. Any kid with a laptop or an internet access has access to information that the smartest, most academic people in the past never even dreamed of having. You've got libraries and libraries and libraries worth of information at your fingertips. However, just because we have more knowledge doesn't mean we have more wisdom. Statistically, as our wealth and technology has increased, you know what else has gone up with the increase of wealth and technology? Depression and suicide. If you go to some of these more secluded, like Hutterite colonies, or some of these people who reject some of that technology, and you find their depression and suicide rates are extremely low compared to what we see. If you go to even some of these third world countries that are not as technologically advanced, you find that actually find that many of the problems that we're struggling with, they don't seem to be struggling with as much. We know and we have more than we've ever known and we've ever had, but it doesn't necessarily make us happier, right? We've got more knowledge, more access to knowledge, more technology than we've ever had, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we will automatically become happier. And how much of the damage that we cause ourselves and each other is due to a lack of wisdom. Simply knowing the right things, but not having that translate into our actions. And so we're gonna do a short little mini teaching series for the next 3 weeks on wisdom. Walking in wisdom. What does it mean to live this out? What does it mean to be wise in the way that we live? What kind of change will that have in our actions, our personal dealings with each other, how we our fathers or husbands or wives or mothers or friends or co-workers? What does it mean to live wisely? What does that look like as we seek to live lives of wisdom? Now, there's a book in the Bible, Proverbs, that is really practical stuff. And so if you're one of those people who are like, man, I don't necessarily want all this philosophical stuff. Give me something that's easy to just put into practice, something that's that I can put some handles on. Proverbs is your book. It is a book full of wisdom. And let me go ahead and read for us. And if you, by the way, if you don't have a Bible, there's a stack of Bibles. I want to give a shout out to Lighthouse Church. They meet over at Tillicum Silver City Movie Theater. Pastor Scott, great guy, a friend of mine, mentor of mine, he gave us a bunch of Bibles. And so if you don't have a Bible, you feel free to grab one at any point during the service. But they're just at that back table in the middle. There's more under the table, so don't worry about those running out. We've got a bunch of them. Please take one of those with you. They're not brand new. They're a little worn out. But should be fine. And so please take one of those with you.
They're broken and not worn out.
That's true. They're broken in. They've already helped other people, and now they can help you. My mom's funny. When she first became a Christian, she was sort of worried, like, I got this brand new Bible. People are going to think I don't read it. And so she sort of crinkled it all. I need to make this look a little worn when she first became a Christian. Proverbs 1, listen to what this says. It says, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight. So he's saying this is the purpose of this book. This is what this book is here for. For receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance, for understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and the riddles of the wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. He said, look, if you want to live well, then wisdom is what you need, and wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. So let me give you there's a lot in there. Let me give you 4 things that I pull out of that I think could be helpful as we jump into this series. Here's the first one. Wisdom is practical. For receiving instruction in prudent behavior. He's not just saying for adding to what you know upstairs. Right? He's not just saying, hey, learn more facts. He's saying, no, you learn these things. The reason why you take this stuff in is for prudent behavior. It's to help you live well. Wisdom is not just knowledge, it's applied knowledge. Andy Stanley says, look, experience doesn't make you wiser, it just makes you older. Right? He says, when you contemplate, when you evaluate your experience, that makes you wiser. Because maybe you are one of these people, I am, or maybe you know one of these people who just keeps making the same mistakes over and over again. And it's like, well, you'd think I'm just gaining more experience, I'm getting wiser. Well, no, he's making the same mistake over and over again, not really evaluating it, not gaining wisdom from it. There's a great book that I put on the recommended reading at the back. I don't know if you've read this, by Paul Johnson, Intellectuals. And it's sort of an academic version of, may I say, like a gossip magazine. And his basic premise is, look, some of the smartest academic movers and shakers of our society had train wrecks for personal lives. They had all these ideas about like how the rest of us should live, and some great ideas in there, some not so great ideas in there. But these guys who basically, he said, sat in the ivory tower and said, look, if you just follow my philosophy, I understand the world, this is how you should live. He said, if you look at their personal lives, oftentimes they were absolute train wrecks. And so he goes through a lot of these intellectuals, but it's fascinating to me. Some of these guys, like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he wrote a lot about how to be a parent, how to raise kids. You know what happened to his 5 kids? Well, first of all, we don't even know their names because they were born, and he dropped them off on the doorstep of an orphanage to just take them in. Never raised any of his own kids. Had 5 kids. As soon as they were born, they'd drop them off there. His first child, we don't even know what gender it was because like there's no record of any of this stuff. Just dropped it off, and we look at records of this orphanage and just see thousands and thousands of kids were just dropped on the doorstep. People who didn't want them from day one. And the guy who became famous telling everybody how to raise their kids never actually raised kids. Isn't that usually the truth? The people who have the strongest opinions about stuff never actually done it, right? And so there was a lot more to that guy as well. How about this guy? Karl Marx basically said, I got the problem figured out. It's this class warfare between these guys and these guys. So much of his ideas were all about the regular guy, the factory worker. Like I'm standing up for that guy. And problem is, we don't have any record that he ever stepped foot in a factory to see what his life actually like for these people. He never had any friends that were, he hardly ever left his study, right? This guy lived at his desk. Never had any close friends that were the working class while he wrote from his ivory tower. The only person that we know that he had any sort of interaction with from the working class that he claimed to know so much about was the maid to his family that he never paid her a cent for any of the work that she did, right? And actually during a dark period of his life had an affair with her, bore a son that he never raised, never even knew. The son never even knew who his father was, really, until Marx was on his deathbed. The secret kind of came out. And we only know of one interaction that he ever had with his son. He was so afraid that people would find out that he kind of banished the maid off to the one part of the house. And anytime the son came to visit, he had to come around back. And they never even crossed paths, except one time they might have crossed on the way into the house. And at that point, the son still didn't even know that this was his own father. Terrible with money, right? Had a lot of ideas of how everyone's supposed to use their money. Was constantly having to borrow money from people and spending it, losing his money, spending it in bad ways. And so what's the point of all that? Why is wisdom important? Because it directs how we live, right? And there's a difference between having all these ideas and then actually figuring out, but do these ideas work? Like when I practice these ideas in real life, what happens? Like, does it help me to live well? Or do these ideas not really translate into real life? That's the difference between knowledge and wisdom, right? Knowledge is saying, I know a lot of things in my head. Wisdom is saying, how do I apply the knowledge I have in my head into my life? How do I live my life well? Here's another thing about wisdom. Wisdom is intellectual. So lest you think that wisdom has nothing to do with thinking, it does. It says, let the wise listen and add to their learning. He says, let the discerning get guidance for understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and the riddles of the wise. You see, wisdom is practical, but it's also intellectual. What we want to learn how to think, not just what to think. And I think that's a difference in wisdom, right? You're not trying to just be programmed, like just fill me with the knowledge I need to know. It's saying, I want to shape my mind so I know how to think. How do I work through problems? How do I build a worldview? How do I understand the worldview that's coming at me from movies and TV and the books that I read? And how do I learn how to think, not just what to think? And let me ask you, what are you currently doing to stretch your mind? What are you currently, are you reading something? Are you listening to something? Are you talking to interesting people? Are you trying to get around different perspectives? What are you doing to stretch your mind? Because if we're going to gain wisdom, we have to become active and critical, not critical like picking things apart, critical like really trying to understand things at a deeper level, listeners. We need to be listeners. He says, let the wise listen and add to their knowledge. Don't be that person who thinks you've got all the answers, right? It's a good reminder for us to be like, man, I shouldn't walk through life being, I just don't know. I have no opinions on anything. I'm just neutral. Like I don't stand. Like I am firmly on the fence on everything. It's like no. Like you gotta have opinions and knowledge and things. But it's saying be a listener. Man, in our media age, we're not great at listening. We're great at giving opinions. We're great at speaking what we think. But oftentimes we're not great at hearing what other people think. And saying, you know what? Even if I disagree with this person might have some good stuff that I need to hear that I could learn from. Like, there might even be a grain of truth in all that craziness. And being good listeners, we're often quick to put our opinions out there on Twitter or social media, or and then surround ourselves with people that affirm what we already believe, saying these big echo chambers, right? They call that confirmation bias, where it's like, this is what I believe. Now I want to surround myself with people who will just basically pat me on the back and be like, you're so smart. I think you're exactly right. And I mean, it's nice to have people like that, right? That support you, but it's also nice to put yourself against other things, to read some things that you don't agree with, right? To try and figure out, all right, so if what I believe is true, then it should stand firm in the marketplace of ideas, right? And if it doesn't, then I need to figure out, like, why do I believe what I believe? Like, do I believe it just because? Or do I have reasons for believing what I believe? It says to get guidance. Well, one other thought on that. Oftentimes, I'll try to tell young people especially, and tell this to myself, so much of what we believe comes to us without us ever critically thinking about it. And so, like, every time you watch a movie or a TV show or something, like, that's a lot of worldview coming at you. It's not neutral, like it is saying something. Every movie says something. Heard a pastor one time say, movies are just sermons using pictures, using story. It's saying something. I mean, every year, look at the Oscar winners and think, did these guys have a worldview? Like, did these movies try to say something? And oftentimes the ones that win the Oscars are the ones that are the loudest preachers. And yet, what do we do typically when we watch TV? We turn it off, right? We turn off the filter. I'm just trying to veg out, man. I'm trying to relax. I just want to watch something. Like, I don't want to think. That's why I'm watching a movie. That's why I'm watching a TV. How dangerous is that? Remove all filters, and you just let whoever that director is preach to you for 2 hours, whatever their worldview is. Now, that's not saying, like, stop watching movies. It's saying sometimes it's good to think through and try to identify, this is coming from a perspective. And I don't want to just take things in, right? I don't want to just be that sink, just dumping grease down the sink and just, no, this isn't going to ever have any bad effects in my life. Like, I'm just going to keep dumping it down there. Well, eventually, with no filter, just putting garbage down the drain, something's going to happen. It's going to come back to you. Let's be intentional about putting ourselves around others who can help us. It says, get guidance to understand these things. You know what I love about having all the generations together? It's because young people can get alongside of the generations ahead of them. Say, look, like, I need guidance. Like, you've walked further down the road than I have. You've got some things to teach me. I love asking guys like Dirk and John and some of these guys who've got kids a little bit ahead of our kids. Mike, so he's being like, hey, so you've walked further down this path than me. Like, what advice do you have for a dad who's got 3 kids under 5, just like treading water? like share with me some wisdom. It's like, well, we're not perfect fathers. Yeah, we understand that. But you've learned some things along the way that we can benefit from. It says, get guidance for understanding these things. I think part of what that means is put yourself around others who can walk with you and help you, because wisdom is passed on. Right? Wisdom is one of those things, like a bad cold. Get yourself around wise people, and maybe you'll catch some of what they have. The third thing is this: wisdom is moral. Wisdom is not just an intellectual exercise that is only on paper. Wisdom is moral. It says for doing, not just doing stuff, not just saying be wise so you can go and like live your own life and just get everything you want out of life. It says for doing what is right and just and fair. It says as you gain wisdom, it should lead you to live in a way that actually benefits other people. That actually benefits society, that as you grow in wisdom, God uses that and uses you to benefit other people. Wisdom is directed to the goal of goodness. It serves something greater than just us, right? Moral questions often have wisdom answers. And so here's a bit of a distinction, I guess. Sometimes I know we can come to the Bible and look and say, all right, like, here's this thing that I want to do. Now let me look through the Bible to say if the Bible tells me I can't do that thing. And if it doesn't tell me I can't do that thing, then I'm going to go do that thing. And it's like, and if the Bible doesn't tell me to do this good thing, then maybe I don't have to do that good thing. Like, and sometimes we treat the Bible as if it's this book of rules. Now there's law in the Bible. That's one of the genres of the Old Testament is law. And so it's good and valuable to learn that and to figure out the context in which that was given, and that stuff is good. But at the same time, not every single question that you're going to have is going to have a thou shalt or thou shalt not in the Bible for that thing. And sometimes our questions are actually wisdom questions, but they're in the realm of morality as well. And we need to use wisdom in what we do. So let me give you a couple examples. One would be the consumption of alcohol, right? Bible doesn't say don't ever drink alcohol. Bible does say, look, drunkenness, taking this thing to excess is the same as taking anything to excess. It damages it. It misuses this thing, and it actually leads to consequences, and we know that, right? How many times do people who are drunk, are they on their best behavior? They're at their best. You're like, this guy, he's a pretty good guy, but when he's drunk, he's like the best guy. Like, he's the best husband, he's the best father, like, he's the best boss, he's the best friend. Like, when this guy is totally intoxicated, it's the best him. We know that's not true, right? It's saying, look, when you take things to excess, it leads to unwise decisions being made. And so I would say, Bible doesn't say don't ever drink alcohol. That becomes one of those wisdom morality questions of saying, all right, so using wisdom, not just looking for a thou shalt or thou shalt not, what should I do with this question? What should my family do with this question? And just to play our cards, our family doesn't participate in alcohol. That's not because there's something in the Bible that says don't do that. It's because as we have thought as a family, saying, all right, let's look at what are we going to do as a family and what are the reasons why we're going to do it. That's the conclusion we came to. And so that's our personal choice. But that wasn't arrived at by finding a verse in the Bible saying don't do this thing. That was arrived at as we sort of worked through and said, okay, our family and for whatever reasons and for what we're doing and all of these questions that came to bear, that was wisdom. Saying, look, wisdom is thinking through things. And sometimes you may not arrive at the same conclusion, right? Maybe for you, maybe in your family, you're saying, hey, we used wisdom, we thought through these things, we came to a different conclusion. It's moral questions that have wisdom as the process of arriving at those answers. And sometimes we arrive at different answers on some of these things, and it's not a this or that. It's, hey, it's not that you're right and we're wrong, or we're right and you're wrong. On some of these things, it's that wisdom question of saying, what is the wise thing for us to do? Now, there's other things where the Bible clearly says, this is wrong. This is against what God would have you do. It's against God's moral law. So there's that level too. Some of these things might be how do we participate in something like Halloween? Like, Bible doesn't say do this or do that with Halloween, and so like, what does our family do? That's a wisdom question, saying as we think through this stuff as a family, trying to be biblical, trying to use wisdom. What do we do? Going to see R-rated movies? What are the content of what you will consume in your media? That's a wisdom question. You're not going to find somewhere in the Bible that says you can only watch up to and including a PG rating. And so that's not what the Bible's for, right? It's not a magic 8-ball to just shake and say, I'm going to go do this. Should I do this? The Bible wants to develop you as a person, right? God speaks through His Word to develop you as a character. As you follow Christ, you say, my goal, my purpose, the reason I'm here is to give glory to God. And so how do I give glory to God? And as that question guides you, and as you use wisdom, you start thinking, so as we face these different decisions, like, we use wisdom to come to the conclusion of how we do these things. And it's a bigger question than just this or that. Sometimes it involves wisdom, and sometimes it just involves a bit more work. It's easy to just say, well, let me just find the yes or no. What if God wants to say, well, what if there's bigger questions? What if it's, you're trying to be more like Jesus? What's going to make you more like Jesus? That's a wisdom question as you start to say, okay, how do I pursue what God has called me to do? There's other examples that, for the sake of time, we won't get into, but one that I would encourage you to think through is the hookup culture in the universities. Cheapening something, I think, that God has created beautiful, taking that and cheapening it and removing it away, basically removing the moral wisdom of a covenant relationship in exchange for just pure hedonistic consent. As long as this person says yes, then let's go do this thing. That must make this moral. Rather than saying, what if this thing was meant to be within a covenant relationship? And we've got all ages, and so I'm being purposefully vague on that. But you know what I'm talking about. Saying, how do I use wisdom in the morality of how I conduct my relationships, physically, emotionally, spiritually? Don't let certain trends cheapen things that God desires to be beautiful. Right? That's a wisdom question, saying, how do I live wisely? Because how I make these decisions is going to have an impact. Am I pouring grease down the drain that's going to come back to cause problems later? Or am I living as God has called me? Chuck Colson, some of you may know this. Some of you may be familiar with Chuck Colson. He was on the fast track to success and power. He was a brilliant guy. His parents were grooming him to go to an Ivy League school, and they were successful because both Harvard and Brown University offered him full ride scholarships. He goes, ends up becoming a lawyer, real smart guy, and then he starts doing his fast track to into the White House. He wasn't trying to be president, but President Nixon invites him to be in his inner council. And he ends up becoming like the right-hand man to the president. And so he's given counsel to the highest job in the country. And so this guy, like, straight up to power. Well, if you remember anything from the Nixon presidency, eventually it's engulfed in scandal. And the great Watergate scandal that has since become sort of a cultural thing. And now anytime there's a scandal, you just add gate to it. It's like, this gate, that gate. That's because this was such a huge bombshell that all this corruption going on in the presidency, and he was right in the middle of that. And he ends up going to jail for it. So he ends up going to prison. He falls from the top spot of power. He's the right-hand man to the president, and now he's in jail. And he goes, that's a long ways to fall. And during that journey, he ends up talking with a friend of his, and the friend of his starts talking to him about who Jesus is. He says, look, what do you think about this? And he started off a real skeptic. I don't believe that. He ends up reading Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and he starts asking these questions and starts realizing, this could be true. And eventually has that moment where he pulls over on the side of the road while he's driving and just starts sobbing. I mean, this isn't a guy who cried, right? His nickname was Hatchet Man, Nixon's Hatchet Man. It was like if there was dirty work to be done, this was the guy that you went to. He knew and understood the dirty world of politics, and it seemed like nothing he wouldn't do. And yet, in his own mind, he thought he was doing good stuff. But this was not a weak man, and yet there he was, finally brought to humility, saying, God, if you're real, Jesus, if you're real, then I need you in my life. Because I thought that I had it figured out. I thought I had wisdom. I had all this knowledge. I went to the top schools. I made it to the top seat of power. And yet what I found was that my pride was my downfall. God, if there's something else out there for me, I need you. And I want you to watch a short interview with him while he explains a little bit of this in his own words. He passed away in 2012, but he eventually, in prison, he starts to see all these men that he was around in their struggles, and he ends up starting a prison ministry that he goes on to do for decades. He spends the rest of his life from that moment on in the prisons, walking with these guys, and it ends up having this incredible. And I was super frustrated when he passed away, because almost every headline was like Watergate scandal. He spent, I think, 35 years in the prisons doing great things, and yet every single headline was just, oh, remember this horrible guy? And it was just like that's what Jesus does, though. He takes us, whatever our past, whatever our mistakes, and he gives us something new, right? Like life begins new. And that was his life. From that point on, the rest of his life was completely different. And so listen to this interview in his own words, and then we'll look at the fourth and final thing of wisdom. Oh, sorry. There we go.
When President Nixon asked me to leave my law firm in Washington and come in and be his special counsel, the first thing I did was to be certain there'd be no conflicts of interest. I took everything I'd earned as a lawyer, I put it in a blind trust. I told my law practice not to come visit me, and they didn't. I was certain that I would never be compromised. I was determined not to be. And I've been raised this way. I've been a Marine officer. I've learned about duty and honor. I've learned about integrity as a Marine. And as a kid growing up in the Depression and tough economic times, my dad was going to school at night, studying to be a lawyer, and he was working days. But on the weekends, he'd spend some time with me. He said, "Chuck, one thing, always tell the truth and never lie. When you work as hard as you possibly can, no matter what it is." He even used the example of cleaning toilets. He said, "Doesn't matter what you're doing, do it well. Earn your pay. Do a hard day's work for an honest day's pay. Pay your bills." I mean, I was steeped in what we then knew as the Puritan work ethic. And being honest, this was a big thing with me. I would get gifts at Christmas time, for example, and I would take them down to the White House switchboard operators, the guys that drove my cars, because I was never going to be compromised. And I was so determined, I ended up going to prison. Why? I think you can be so self-righteous that you don't see what's really going on. You become oblivious to your own insensitivities because you're sure nobody can compromise you. Human beings have the infinite capacity of self-rationalization, and that's exactly what I did. I was in a lot of meetings where there were high stakes, where the President of the United States would say, national security depends on this. Kissinger came in fulminating one day over some documents that had been stolen, and he said, "This is going to compromise all of national security." I can think back on times, I remember when the President, 4 or 5 of us in the office, and the President was exploding over something that had gotten out and was in the hands of the Brookings Institution, and he turned to Bob Holt and he said, "Bob, have we got a team in place that can go and get those documents back? Remember, I've asked you for that." Then I later realized that was the time when I should have stopped and said, "Wait a minute, Mr. President, think about the consequences of this." But I did not. Self-righteousness is believing you're so good that you couldn't be compromised. And that's the kind of pride that's fatal, and was in my life, because I was so sure of myself that I didn't realize how vulnerable I was, as every human being is.
What Colson learned is what our last point is that wisdom is ultimately spiritual. Wisdom is not built on yourself. And that's what self-righteousness is saying, like, I've got the capacity to become everything I need to be. I don't need anything from the outside. I've got it in me to become righteous, to become good. It says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. That's the starting place. But fools despise wisdom and instruction. He believed that his own righteousness was enough of a foundation for his wisdom. And he was wrong, because ultimately that leads to pride. And pride is a pretty big downfall. It's a pretty big letdown. True wisdom cannot be separated from a relationship with God. Wisdom comes to us from the outside, which should lead us to humility. And you know what I've discovered? Is you'll never find a wise person who's not also a humble person. Think of the people you've met, the people that you respect, the people that you would say, this person's got wisdom. And they're always humble, because I think wisdom helps you to understand just how far you still have got to go. It's the opposite of this self-righteousness of saying, I've got it all figured out, and saying, you know what, let me be the first to tell you how much I don't know, but here's some things that by the grace of God, God has taught me, and then you pass on wisdom. And so how does Jesus fit into this? Right? What difference does Jesus make? Well, Jesus is the perfect expression of what Proverbs looks like. He lived this out perfectly, our perfect example, but he's more than that. His death and resurrection allow us to have a personal relationship with this God, the source of wisdom. And from within this relationship, God helps us to become wise, because he ultimately takes us beyond ourselves and helps us to become more like Jesus. So when you can have a relationship with that God at that starting place, there's no telling what God can do as he transforms your life. And it's not built on the foundation of yourself. It's not saying, like Colson was saying, like, I can never be compromised. I've got what it takes. It's this humility to say, God, I start with you. You be the starting place. You're a foundation that I can build my life on. And as I plant on that foundation, God, would you take my life? Would you make me wise? Why? Because it matters down the road. For my relationships, for my kids, for my spouse. God, make me wise so that I can live well. Because when I live well, it's good for me, it's good for other people, but ultimately it also reflects well on you. And so I'm going to invite Jake to come back up, and he's going to close us out with a song here in a moment, and a time for us to reflect on what this says. But let me ask you, are you walking in wisdom? Are you pursuing wisdom? Wisdom is not one of those things that just happens. It's one of those things that we say, God, as I pursue you, ultimately I pursue wisdom. Because it starts with you. Young people, don't lower yourself to the standards that culture places on you. Culture's got pretty low standards for young people, right? Oh, when you're young, that's when you sow your wild oats. That's when you make mistakes. That's when you go off and do crazy stuff. You know who those who are wise when they're older are those who sought wisdom when they were younger, right? Those who reflected on their experience, not those who just charged through life and said, hey, I'm going to make all these mistakes when I'm younger, and then, that's not going to have any consequence for me down the road. Young people, let me plead with you and say, you can be wise now in your youth. Why? Because wisdom starts with the fear of God, with knowing God. And you can know God while you're young. And so young people, you can be wise because you can have a relationship with the starting point and the foundation of wisdom. Older adults, it says, those who are wise, increase your wisdom. Like none of us have made it. Right? So there's always room for us to grow. We talked about this several weeks ago. Keep moving forward. You don't have to run. You don't have to be ahead of this person. It's not a race, right? We're trying to get to the same destination. Just keep moving forward. One step at a time. It says, add to your wisdom, those who are wise. Older adults, we never stop learning and growing. And the fact is that we seek wisdom because we want to have something to pass on to the next generation. It's not just about the benefits it has for our life, which does have benefits for our life, but we care about these young people. We want something to pass down. We want to pass down our faith. We want to say, guys, look, I made some mistakes in my life. Let me tell you something that I learned that I wish I knew when I was your age. And I mean, it's up to the young people to take it or leave it, right? But don't it ever be said of us that we didn't at least pass the wisdom on, that we didn't at least give them the choice to accept it or reject it. Let's pass it on together, that they might take up the baton and run their race. And so let me pray for us, and then Jake's going to lead us in a song here as we wrap up. Let me pray that the source of wisdom would give us wisdom to live well, to bring him glory, that ultimately people would not see us and just say, you guys, do you have it all figured out? You guys, no, not at all. But let me point you to the one that I go to, because I know how fallible I am. But let me point you to the foundation that I try to build my life on. Because that God, knowing that God, that's where wisdom starts. So let me pray for us. God, we thank you. We thank you that you don't call us to be something that you don't also offer to equip us to be. So God, we know that we don't have it in ourselves to be righteous, to be good. We're all fallen. We all make mistakes. We've got 1,000 examples of ways that we've messed up. And yet, God, you don't call us to be perfect and then leave us on our own to try and do the impossible. But you came to us. Jesus came to us, God in the flesh. Not just to give us an example of what this looks like, but to die in our place for the mistakes that we've already made, that we might come to know God, and that as we do, you would be the foundation for us. So God, we ask that you'd make us wise. And we know that the way you will make us wise is by drawing us to yourself. So God, tonight, wherever we are on that journey, would you draw us closer to you as we sing this song? As we meditate, as we reflect on these words, God, draw us close to yourself, that we might live well, and by so doing, bring glory to the God who created us for this purpose. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Jake's going to lead us. So you sing. Let's sing this.
Amazing love that welcomes me, the kindness of mercy that bought with blood wholeheartedly, my soul undeserving. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. You're so good to me. Behold the cross, age to age, and hour by hour, the dead are raised, the sinners saved, the work of your power. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. You're so good to me. Sing, I am blessed. I am blessed. I am called. I am healed. I am whole. I am saved in Jesus' name. Be favored, anointed, filled with your power for your glory. Jesus' name. I am blessed, I am called, I am healed, I am whole, I am saved in Jesus' name. Highly favored, anointed, filled with your power for the glory of Jesus' name. And should this life bring suffering, Lord, I will remember what Calvary has bought for me, both now and forever. Let's all stand together. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. You're so good to me. Sing that again. God, you're so good. God, you're so good.
you're encouraged tonight. God is good. It's the beginning of wisdom, and He loves you. And so wherever you are, don't beat yourself up that you're not further down the road. God can take you one step at a time, but it starts with a relationship with Him. And so if you don't have that, if you're like, I'm still working my way through that, I don't know, please feel free to contact me, email me, I'd love to talk with you more about that. If you're like, hey, I've got questions about this. We love questions here. And so there's no question that we're going to be like, you can't ask that. And so if you're working through this, please come talk to me. If you're here for the first time, would love to get to know you, get to meet you if I haven't already, even if I have already. And so there's envelopes on the chairs, every other chair. If you're new here, if this is your first time, we're a new church. So everybody in here and those who aren't here tonight, they've all been new recently. So please don't feel like you're somehow like, man, did all these people know each other? We're getting to know each other, and God's bringing new people. And so if that's you, if this is your first time, please fill that card out for me. And then I would love if you would just come up in just a moment after we dismiss. Bring that card to me. I've got a small gift to give you in exchange for that card, just to say, hey, we mean it when we say we're thankful that you came tonight, and we want to send you home with a little something. If you're a regular here and you're feeling God has led you to give an offering as an act of worship, to say, God, you've given me so much, you've been good in my life, I want to give back to you. You can do that also on those envelopes. There's instructions on the back. You can put those in the box on that back center table. One thing coming up next week, Oak Bay Ave is closing down. They're doing a big community event, and like I've said before, we're not celebrating. The wrong term to use is we're not celebrating Halloween. But we are saying, look, we want to be part of our community. We believe in loving families and blessing our community. And so we want to look for opportunities to do that. And so coming up next week on the 31st is an opportunity to do that. It's from 2 to 5. They have asked us to come and to set up a bunch of games and some candy. And we're going to have an info table there. So if people are interested, who are you? Tell me more about Canvas. Jesus told us to love our neighbor. You can't love your neighbor if you don't know your neighbor, right? And they anticipate about 1,000 people coming from the community to be on Oak Bay Ave. That's 1,000 of our neighbors coming right to us for us to love them. And so encourage you to I think we forgot to put the sign-up sheet out there, so we'll find that. Or you can let me know if you can help in one of those games. Would love to. We need more help, and so if you can be there, even for just part of that, please come and it's going to be a great time to love and to serve our community in this way, because God has given us a heart to serve our community. And so encourage you, get to know somebody that you don't know yet. Look around for someone that you've not yet had a chance to meet. Introduce yourself to them. Let me pray for us, and then we'll be dismissed. God, we thank you again. We thank you that you loved us enough to come to us. And so, God, from this place, would you send us out to love our community, to be an ambassador for you, to represent you well this week. We know that we won't do it perfectly. So, God, give us wisdom to live well, not just for our own benefit, and not just for the benefit of our loved ones, but so that we might represent you well to a world that does not yet know you, that they would come to know that they can have a personal relationship with the God, the source of wisdom. Would you give us wisdom to know how to do that this week as we walk together, taking baby steps forward as you lead us. God, we love you, not just because of who you are, of what you've done, but because of who you are. You're good, and you've done good things because that's who you are. And so, God, in response, we love you. We ask that you would continue to help us to grow in wisdom this week. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, guys. We'll see you again soon.
What time do you want us there if we're helping?
So if you're going to come and help for the event, we're going to be starting at 2. So come about 1:30.
1:30. That's what we need to know. Yeah.
We can get a lot done in half an hour.
Oh, I
Throw those games up.
I'm ready.
He's ready.